Shalom and welcome to Ner Glide Jewish Ministries, where we teach the Bible from a Jewish historical, cultural, and linguistic perspective. As we continue in our teaching series on the book of Revelation, we are starting this teaching with part 2, which focuses on Revelation chapters 6 to 11. So if you have not yet watched the first part, chapters 1 to 5, I encourage you to go back to the Ner Glide website and view those teachings, because each teaching does build on one another. So we're focusing on chapter 6 in this teaching, and I've titled this teaching The End Times. What better title for one of the teachings in the book of Revelation than The End Times? But I think we'll see how this is significant, especially for Revelation chapter 6. Now, the context of Revelation chapter 6 is regarding things to come, right? That which is still prophesied for the future, according to Yeshua's own words, which we saw previously in the first teaching in Revelation 1:19, where Yeshua said, "Therefore write the things which you have seen, and the things which are, and the things which will take place after these things," right? This is the instructions that Yeshua gave to the Apostle John. And this verse really gives a great outline, a great overview of the book of Revelation, because we see how chapter 1 focuses on the things which John saw, that which was past tense. Chapters 2 and 3 of the book of Revelation focus on the things which were present at that time, right? The things which are, the messages to the seven congregation. And then chapters 4 to 22, which is the majority of the book, focuses on the things which will take place after these things. So the book is clearly divided up into these three sections, and we are introduced to the third section, the things that come after, in Revelation chapter 4, verse 1. It's a very clear pivot to the things which come after, right? So just to read this again, even though we already have looked at this, in Revelation 4:1, it says, quote, "After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard, like the sound of a trumpet speaking with me, said, 'Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after these things.'" Right? So this was John the Apostle speaking here, and then he hears the voice of Yeshua, right? Telling him about the things which will take place after these things. So from Revelation chapter 4, verse 1, going forward, it's just prophecy about things that prophecies of the future, right? And they're even from today. This was prophesied 2,000 years ago, but we're still looking forward to the kind of with a little bit of trepidation, right, of the things to come. Now, in Revelation chapter 5, we're introduced to the book or scroll which is sealed with the seven seals. And we also see how this book is in the hand of God, and we're assuming it's God the Father who is sitting on the throne, because we also see God the Son in this scenario, as well as the Holy Spirit. So it just makes sense that God the Father is the one who's sitting on the throne. Now, this book is described as being written on both sides, on the inside and the back, and sealed with seven seals. As we saw in the previous teaching, no one in all of creation is able to open the book or break its seals except for the lion from the tribe of Judah. And then we're given this beautiful, colorful image of Yeshua as the the lion from the tribe of Judah, the root of David, and as a lamb who has been slain. He's given these different titles, and we'll also see these different images of him in chapter 5. It is only Yeshua as the Lamb of God who is worthy to open this book and break its seals. And it's for good reason that we worship Yeshua as God, right? He came from heaven to earth, humbled himself, gave his own life for us. Therefore, he is exalted above all of creation. And we really see him exalted in Revelation chapter 5. It is uniquely Yeshua the Messiah, whom we see in Revelation chapter 6, breaking the seals of the book, thereby releasing its contents. Now, before we actually get into the text of Revelation 6, I just want us to remember the blessings and curses that we read about here in the book of Revelation. We see uniquely in the first and last chapter a blessing and a curse, in a sense that we need to heed. We already reviewed the blessing in chapter 1, verse 3 in the first teaching, where we read, Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of the prophecy and heed the things which are written in it, for the time is near, right? And what a blessing again it is to read this scripture, to hear it, and to heed it or to guard it, to keep it, right? And so we need to do our best to understand the things written in it and to walk in this blessing, right? But on the other side, at the end of the book of Revelation, chapter 22, verses 18 and 19, we read about this curse or this warning. And I just want to read these verses again because it's humbling, and it's a good reminder, though, of how we are to treat this text. We read this, quote, I testify to everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book. If anyone adds to them, God will add to him the plagues which are written in this book. And if anyone takes away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God will take away his part from the tree of life and from the holy city, which are written in this book. And so we have these amazing, in a sense, blessings and curses. And we need to heed both of them. We need to pursue the blessing, read it, hear it, and heed the words of this prophecy. But we must be careful to not add or take away the words of this book. And these words are doubly important for someone like me who's teaching it, as well as for you who are hearing it, right? We need to be careful with this special word of prophecy. But the book of Revelation is unique. From Revelation chapters 4 to the end to 22, it's 100% prophecy. It's a very unique book. It's an amazing book. And for that reason, there are a lot of pastors and Bible teachers who won't even teach it because they're not sure of they don't have all the answers, or maybe they don't understand some things, and so they're afraid of it. We need to not fear it. We need to pursue that blessing of reading it and understanding it the best we can, but we need to handle it with care, and we need to be careful to not add or take away from what is written in the text of this prophecy. And also, I just want to remind all of us that we need to remember that there's this tension between the details which are given in the text of this prophecy, and there's mystery. There's things we don't know, and we need to be okay with that. We need to be able to accept that because we don't have all the answers. I, as a Bible teacher, don't have all of the answers, but we do our best to understand what we can. So, with that in mind, let us read Revelation chapter 6. Now, I'm going to actually read the whole chapter. It's 17 verses. We'll read it from the beginning and then kind of take it bit by bit. It's fairly straightforward, but then we're going to go through each of the seals as they're broken. So let me just read through Revelation chapter 6. Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying as with a voice of thunder, Come, I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer. When he broke the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature saying, Come, and another, a red horse, went out, and to him who sat on it, it was granted to take peace from the earth, and that men should slay one another, and a great sword was given to him. When he broke the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature saying, Come. I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard something like a voice in the center of the 4 living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not damage the oil and the wine. When the Lamb broke the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature saying, Come. I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over 1/4 of the earth, to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. When the Lamb broke the 5th seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? And there was given to each of them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed even as they had been would be completed also. I looked when he broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Then the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the commanders, and the rich, and the strong, and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand?" Wow, there's a lot in there. So that is Revelation chapter 6. And in this chapter, we see this rapid succession of the broken seals as Yeshua breaks each of the seals. Now, 6 of the 7 seals are broken with their resulting events or descriptions of the situations. The breaking of the 7th seal is later recorded in Revelation chapter 8, and we'll look at that when we get to it. But that is simply just bridging to the 7 trumpets. Now, how are we best to understand the timing of the events which occur by the breaking of the 7 seals or the 6 seals that we just read about? So I want to quote a couple of different biblical scholars, and then I'll give you my take, right? So Otis Yoder, former professor of New Testament language and literature at Eastern Mennonite College, has stated the following. According to the structural outline of the book, chapter 6 initiates the beginning of the tribulation period. So basically, he's saying how this begins the Great Tribulation. Now, Dr. John Walvoord also explains his opinion regarding the content and timing of Revelation chapter 6. He says, quote, "Most expositors assume that the events beginning in Revelation 6 cover the whole 7-year period. The book of Revelation, however, never uses a 7-year figure, but frequently refers to 3½ years or 42 months. Because the events of chapter 6 and afterward seem to coincide with the Great Tribulation, rather than with the time of peace in the first half of the 7 years," and he quotes 1 Thessalonians 5:3, "there are good reasons for concluding that these great events are compacted in the last 3½ years before Christ's return to the earth. Certainly at least by the 4th seal, the events described anticipate a time of unprecedented trouble." So that's from Dr. Walvoord, right? Now, in summary, Professor Yoder basically says that Revelation chapter 6 initiates the tribulation period, referring to the Great Tribulation, right? The last 3½ years. Dr. Walvoord, he explains how most expositors, most evangelical commentators say that Revelation 6 covers the whole 7-year period of the end times. And I'll be talking more about that. Now, Dr. Walvoord also says he personally sees Revelation 6 focusing more on the time of the Great Tribulation, right? So similar to Professor Yoder. And I'll share my perspective here as well, the Goldstein perspective, which is basically similar. I mean, we're talking about the end times here. So as already mentioned, Revelation chapters 4 to 22 contain prophecies regarding the events which take place, quote unquote, after these things, right? As we see in Revelation 4:1. This is referring to the end times. Now, although some of the events in Revelation chapter 6 could have occurred in the past, it makes most contextual sense, just as these Dr. Walvoord and Professor Yoder have mentioned, right? That all of the events in Revelation 6 are in the end times and mostly focusing on the time of the Great Tribulation. So, what do I mean when I use the phrase "the end times"? We use this phrase very frequently in Christian circles and evangelical circles, even in secular circles, right? The end times is spoken of a lot. What do we mean? What do I actually mean when I'm using this phrase? And I want to kind of explain that a little bit. So in my opinion, the end times specifically refers to the 70th week or the final 7 years, as is documented in the book of Daniel. Now, the 70th week or the final 7 years is only mentioned in Daniel 9:27. It's only in one verse in all of the Bible. And for those of you who didn't go through the Book of Daniel series, I encourage you to go back and look at those teachings, especially chapter 9. There's only 2 teachings there. It's important to understand that foundation of that 70-week teaching as we talk about the end times. So I believe the final 7 years, that 70th week, are the focus here in Revelation chapters 4 to 19. Now, we read in Daniel 9:24 that these quote-unquote 70 weeks, or they're called 77s or 77s of years, right, have been decreed for the people and for Jerusalem to seal up vision and prophecy. So actually, that's some quotes from that verse in 9:24, Daniel 9:24. Now, we know that 69 out of the 70 weeks have been fulfilled historically, right? So we see that in history. Again, go back and watch the teachings on Daniel 9 for those of you who either need a refresher or if you haven't watched them yet. It's a very important foundational teaching on what we see in the end times. Now, only one set of 7 years remains, which is the 70th week, right? The final 7 years, which we call the end times. And that's what I'm referring to when I use this phrase, the end times. Now, at the end of the book of Daniel, we read how an angel instructed Daniel to seal up the words of the book that he was shown. So I just want to read a couple of verses here from Daniel chapter 12, right? In verse 4, we read, quote, "But as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time. Many will go back and forth and knowledge will increase." And then later on in verse 9, we read again, he said, "Go your way, Daniel, for these words are concealed and sealed up until the end time." And I don't think it's any coincidence we see this sealed book in Daniel 9, which referring to the end times, the 70th week, and then we had that book that is sealed in Revelation 5 and unsealed in Revelation 6, right? Now, the final verse in the book of Daniel reads like this, Daniel 12:13. "But as for you, go your way to the end, then you will enter into rest and rise again for your allotted portion at the end of the age." So it's very interesting. Literally, the last words in the book of Daniel are at the end of the age, or in Hebrew, it's leketz hayamin, right? Simply at the end of days. That's literally what it says, at the end of days. And so we often talk about the last days, the end times. That's all the same subject, right? It's all the same time frame, the end times. So, just kind of in conclusion here, it is my opinion and conviction that the prophecy of the breaking of the sealed book in Revelation chapter 6 is a clear fulfillment of the sealed book in Daniel chapters 9 and 12, which will be unsealed and released in the end times, right? In the final 7 years. But specifically speaking of that 70th week, the end times is that 70th week, the final 7 years. So the main events of the end times occur within the final 7 years, followed by the millennial reign of the Messiah, right? That 1,000-year reign, and his enduring kingdom into eternity. And all of Revelation chapters 4 to 22 include these things. The majority of it focuses on the end times from chapters 4 to 19. And then the last 3 chapters, 20 to 22, deal with the millennial reign and the eternal kingdom. Now, this final 7 years is also defined by the Antichrist confirming a covenant, right, for that time period. And he breaks that covenant in the middle at the 3.5-year mark. Now, there is not much information regarding the initial 3.5 years of the final 7 years. Therefore, it appears to be a time of peace and quiet. And Dr. Walford mentioned that. There's just not much written about those first 3.5 years. So we just don't understand exactly what will happen. But it's considered to be a time of peace. And this may be what is being communicated in 1 Thessalonians 5:3, as Dr. Walford himself even quoted this verse, which says, quote, "While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape." So we see how that first part of the 7 years will be most likely a time of peace, followed by the Great Tribulation, which is chaos and calamity on the earth. Again, the second half, the final 7 years, is called the Great Tribulation. And we see this literally spoken about in Matthew 24:21, Revelation 7:14, and other scriptures. That part is given a lot of attention. We have a lot of details about the time of the Great Tribulation. A lot of people confuse the last 7 years with the Great Tribulation, but it's important to understand that there'll be that first 3.5 years, which are generally considered a time of peace, and the last 3.5 years, a time of the Great Tribulation, which will be kind of like a hell on earth. Now, it is in the context of the 7 years of the end times that we will seek to understand how the events of Revelation 6 will play out in the future. So let's get back to the text of Revelation chapter 6. And just to read this first section again, verses 1 and 2, where it says, quote, "Then I saw when the Lamb broke one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying, as with a voice of thunder, 'Come.' I looked, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer." So before we move on, I just wanted to ask the question, why is it written that he broke one of the 7 seals rather than the first seal? And we have to speculate, but I think it's for the simple reason that when you see this sealed scroll, it's not like each seal had a number on it, right? It wasn't like number 1, number 2, number 3. There were simply 7 seals. And so when Yeshua, the Lamb, right, he breaks one of them. So it's only after the first one is broken that you have the second, third, fourth, right? And so all the other seals are numbered second, third, fourth. The first one, it simply says one of the 7 seals, but we know it's the first seal. So after Yeshua breaks the first seal, we read how one of the 4 living creatures that we read about early on in chapter 4 invites John to see the result of the broken seal. Now, just to mention, the other 3 living creatures are mentioned for the next 3 broken seals, but then John sees for himself as the final 3 seals are broken. There's no longer mention of one of the living creatures inviting John, right? It's only for the first 4 seals, and we'll kind of talk about that more later. So John explains how he saw a rider on a white horse. He had a bow, a crown was given to this rider, and he went out conquering. So who is this rider on a white horse? Now, we are not told who the rider of this horse will be, and the same is true for all of the riders of the different horses. We're never given an identity of them. We're only told what the riders do and the outcome on the earth and for humanity. So they're more like pictures of different events that are released and different situations, as we'll see. Now we read about another white horse only in one other place in the New Testament, and that's in Revelation 19, and that's when the Messiah returns. He actually returns with his army, who they are also on white horses. But just to read this verse in Revelation 19:11. "And I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and wages war." Now we know just in the context of in Revelation 19, this is the end of the Great Tribulation. The Messiah will ride on a white horse when he comes with his army at the end of the Great Tribulation. And that's when he begins his reign. Now, there's nothing in the verses of Revelation 6 or in the context that points to this rider being the Messiah. Since the rider on a white horse in Revelation 6 comes at the beginning of the end times and is said to go out conquering, he is most likely the end times world ruler, also known as, right, aka the Antichrist or the false Messiah. Now, this is just not my opinion. This is common knowledge. So I'm in agreement with what most evangelical scholars believe. It just makes the most sense. Now, we read about this bow and crown, right? Now, these seem to be symbols of power and authority, respectively, right? The bow representing power and the crown representing authority. And we see this picture here, just to mention, there are no arrows that are mentioned, just a bow and a crown, because that's important. So the power and authority of this world ruler to conquer are understood as being achieved in a non-violent manner, as explained here by Dr. John Wavard. He says, quote, "This ruler has a bow without an arrow, indicating that the world government which he establishes is accomplished without warfare. The future world government begins with a time of peace, but is soon followed by destruction. And again, he quotes here 1 Thessalonians 5:13. So what is the timing of this event of the first seal being broken? So I mentioned here that I understand this event to be the beginning of the end times, the start to the final 7 years. The rule of the Antichrist during the end times will begin with his global influence to conquer other peoples and nations without violence. And I think this is where that covenant of peace, which we read about in Daniel 9:27, clearly ties in, right? So you have this, I call it a covenant of peace, right? But he makes a covenant in the beginning of the 7 years. And it makes sense that it would be some kind of peace covenant that he brings other nations into, and thereby he's conquering nations and gaining control over them without actually doing anything, right? So again, this is a little bit of my understanding of it, putting together these scriptures. So again, just to reiterate, I believe that the breaking of the first seal will mark the beginning of the end times, as well as that start of the reign of the Antichrist, putting all the pieces together. We are never told exactly how the events of the seals work out time-wise. We kind of have to put them together with other scriptures. So again, I'm giving you my opinion about how I see this working out on the timeline. So going on to the second seal, right? In verses 3 and 4, we read, "When he broke the second seal, I heard the second living creature saying, 'Come.' And another, a red horse, went out, and to him who sat on it, it was granted to take peace from the earth, and that men would slay one another, and a great sword was given to him." Okay, so here we see the breaking of the second seal, which releases a rider on a red horse who takes peace from the earth. So this event is marked by a great sword, right? A great sword was given to him. Now, just to mention, there's always been war on earth since the beginning of time. However, a time is coming in the future when peace will be taken from the earth in the end times and men will kill one another. Now, I believe that this event coincides with the beginning of the Great Tribulation, right? The final 3.5 years before the Messiah returns. Again, this correlates with this covenant that the Antichrist makes. The first 3.5 years, there seems to be peace, silence. There's a breaking of that covenant, and then peace is taken from the earth. So this time of war is also a characteristic of the end times world ruler who seeks to make war with many nations. So in the beginning, he's peaceful. The second half, he's a man of war, the Antichrist, right? So the end times world ruler will especially hate the people of God, the saints, and will persecute them as he blasphemes the name of God. And I've written just a couple of scriptures down here, Daniel 7:25 and Revelation 13:1-7. And just to mention, we will look at this in more detail, especially in Revelation 13. But there are several passages that talk about, in both Old and New Testament, right, that talk about how this end times world ruler, the Antichrist, will seek to make war not only with other nations but also with believers, especially in that time of the Great Tribulation. That's when the peace is taken, when the sword is given, and there's hell on earth. Moving on to the third seal. When he broke the third seal, I heard the third living creature saying, "Come." I looked, and behold, a black horse, and he who sat on it had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard something like a voice in the center of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not damage the oil and the wine." So the third seal is marked by a pair of scales in the hand of a rider on a black horse. So an announcement is made that the scales are indicating a drastic change in food prices, right? We read, quote, "A quart of wheat for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius." So what is denarius? A denarius, it's a Latin word, and it comes from the Latin denarion, and it's simply a Roman silver coin. We've all heard of a denarius before, but what is the financial equivalence of a denarius? It is typically understood as a day's wage, and we literally read about this in Matthew 20:1-16. There's a parable there. You can read about it yourself, but it's clearly a day's wage. So what is a day's wage? Now, I'm living in Israel, but also the Bible was written in the land of Israel, right? So let's use a little bit of Israeli economics here. An average salary in Israel today in 2022 is 11,000 shekels, right? NIS is New Israeli Shekel, 11,000 shekels per month, which is equivalent to about $3,300 US per month. Now, with 22 working days each month, an average daily wage is approximately 500 shekels in Israel, right? So a denarius, a day's wage, is equivalent to 500 shekels or 150 US dollars. Now, 1 quart of wheat equals approximately 1.3 pounds of wheat or a half a kilo of wheat, right? So basically a half a kilo. So today in Israel, a half a kilo of wheat sells for approximately 2.25 shekels, or 70 cents in U.S. currency. So calculating the difference, going from 2.25 shekels, or 70 cents per half kilo, to 500 shekels, 150 US dollars per half kilo of wheat, it is an increase of 22,000% by today's standard. The inflation that will occur during the end times will be extreme, and it will cause great hunger, chaos, and famine in the world. Now, the price of grain is emphasized in these verses. However, there's a warning to, quote, not damage the oil and the wine, which is very interesting. Why is it commanded to not harm the oil or wine? Now, there's not a reason given in the text. Perhaps it's to simply signify how the grain of the earth, the wheat and the barley, will be affected at that time, but not the fruit of the tree or the fruit of the vine, olives and grapes. Other than that, I don't have any great answer for why the olives and grapes are not affected at this time. Now, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which occurred several months ago in February of 2022, has illustrated how fast the global economy can be affected and the price of wheat can skyrocket. We've literally seen these shifts in the economy because of the pandemic in the last couple of years, as well as the war in Ukraine. And we can see how fast prices can change. Now, the breaking of the third seal will release inflation and famine on the earth. So what is the timing of the events of the third seal? When does the third seal occur? Again, there is no exact time given for any of the seals when they're broken. They seem to be in succession from beginning to end. And I believe all of the events from the breaking of the second seal, when peace is removed from the earth forward, occur during the time of the Great Tribulation, right? So seals 2 to 7 are all happening from the beginning. The second seal breaks or establishes the start of the Great Tribulation, when peace is taken from the earth, and then till the end when the seventh seal is broken. Let's move on to the fourth seal. Quote, when the Lamb broke the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature saying, come. I looked, and behold, an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him. Authority was given to them over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, with famine, and with pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. So just to mention that the natural result of war and famine, the second and third seals, is death, right? And literally we're seeing this right now in Ukraine. You see war, you see a scarcity of food, and just people surviving, and it brings death. The fourth horse is described as ashen. However, the Greek word is chloros and literally means green, and it's generally used throughout the New Testament as something green or vegetation. So that's a more accurate understanding of that word, more of a green horse. Now, the rider of this horse is called Death, and he is followed by Hades. So there's two messengers here for this particular, when this seal is broken. Death and Hades are given authority to kill 25% of the population of the earth by sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts. This is it's hard to fathom, right? How this many people will be killed in a short time. Sword, famine, pestilence, and wild beasts are all instruments of judgment, which are found in the scriptures. And I just mentioned a couple here, Leviticus 26 and Jeremiah 24. We see it in other places as well. Now, we are currently at about 8 billion people on planet Earth in the year 2022. If a quarter of the population, 25% of the population was killed today, this would mean 2 billion people would be killed. Again, it's difficult just to even contemplate this, right? The amount of death that would occur in a short amount of time. We don't know exactly how long it will take. Moving on to the fifth seal. When the Lamb broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God and because of the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth?" And there was given to each of them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also. Very sobering breaking of this seal. Now, the breaking of the fifth seal is unique in a few different ways. I just want to point these out. Number one, there is no longer the involvement of one of the four living creatures who invites John to see the result of the broken seal, right? It's simply broken and John looks. Number two, there are no more horses or riders who go out to accomplish something. Seals 5 and 6, which we'll see in a second again, give a voice to people, to believers and to unbelievers, right? To the people of God and to those who reject God and reject Yeshua. So they're very unique. They're explaining situations from people's perspective. So we'll look at this more. So the breaking of the fifth seal reveals a scene in heaven of the souls of those who are slain or martyred for their faith in the word of God and for their testimony. Those who have been slain cry out for justice for their killers who are still alive on the earth. They ask the Lord how much longer he will refrain from avenging their blood. As believers in God, as believers in Messiah Yeshua, our hearts long for justice on this earth. Complete justice will only truly be fulfilled at the second coming of the Messiah. And I wrote on the screen Psalm 13. I have this picture, right? How long, O Lord? Because this psalm asks that question, and it's the cry of our hearts. Every one of us, whether it's a situation that's unbearable, or an injustice, right? Whatever it may be, there's a cry in our hearts for justice, for completion, for answers, and it's especially the cry of believers, and we're longing to see God act. And it will happen. So without identifying who responds to the cry of the martyrs, we are told that they are given a white robe and that they are told to rest for a little while longer. So how long are they to rest? We read in verse 11, quote, "Until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also." And this is a very important insight into the time of the end times, into the time of the Great Tribulation. The fifth seal reveals that believers will continue to be martyred for their faith and for their testimony during the time of the Great Tribulation. One misunderstanding of the end times is that it is only a pouring out of the wrath of God. However, the majority of the final 7 years focuses on the reign of the Antichrist, the end times world ruler. One of the goals of the Antichrist during the end times is to persecute and kill the people of God, as we read about in the book of Daniel, as well as in the New Testament. I'm going to read a couple of verses here, Daniel 7, verse 21, where it says, quote, "I kept looking, and that horn was waging war with the saints and overpowering them." And then again in verse 25 in Daniel 7, "He will speak out against the Most High and wear down the saints of the Highest One." And we read a similar description in Revelation chapter 13 of the acts of the Antichrist, right? In Revelation 13, 7 to 8. Quote, "It was also given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who has been slain." So again, it's important to understand the continual spiritual warfare on earth and how it will intensify in the end times. Everyone on earth at that time will be challenged with worshiping either the Antichrist or Yeshua. So as we continue to study the book of Revelation, you can determine for yourself regarding the timing of our being caught up, gathered together to the Messiah, and resurrected from the dead. We just need to take God's word at face value and understand what he reveals to us. So whereas the fifth seal is a cry of the believers and a warning of more martyrs during the end times, those who will be killed because of their testimony, because of the word of God, the sixth seal reveals various signs and a cry of the unredeemed on earth. And we read this in the final verses of Revelation 6. "I looked when he broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Then the kings of the earth and the great men and the commanders and the rich and the strong and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, 'Fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand?'" And that's the end of Revelation chapter 6, the sixth seal, right? So the sixth seal releases signs on the earth. There's an earthquake as well as signs in the sun, moon, and stars, indicating that the time of the end is near. Now, those who do not know Yeshua will be deathly afraid of the signs that precede his coming. That is why Yeshua warned us in advance of these signs. These specific signs are also prophesied many times in the Old Testament, for example, in Isaiah 13, in Joel 2, and other places. Now, Yeshua quoted these Old Testament prophets as recorded in Matthew 24 regarding these very signs to come, which we just read about in Revelation 6. So we read this in Matthew 24, beginning in verse 29. Yeshua's words, right? "But immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory, and he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other." The second coming of Yeshua will be a time of judgment for those who oppose Yeshua, but a time of salvation for those who call on his name, for those who are known by him and those who know him. Now, in Revelation 6, we read how the six seals will be broken in the end times, releasing various events on earth and in heaven according to what is written in this quote-unquote sealed book. The seventh seal coincides with the seven trumpets as recorded in Revelation 8, and we'll look at that more later. Now, I believe the breaking and releasing of the seven-sealed book is given to us to understand the events of this 70th week, right? The final 7 years until the great apocalypse when the Messiah returns. The breaking of the six seals introduces the end times events with an overview of the final 7 years. And it's very interesting as I've studied, because I really think it's such a unique picture of the beginning to the end of the 7 year period, right? The end times. And as we see it from the first seal when it's broken, the reign of the Antichrist, until the end, those signs right before the Son of Man returns, right? So I believe that's really what Revelation chapter 6 is showing us. It's an overview of the final 7 years, the end times. So throughout the remaining chapters, Revelation chapters 7 to 19, we read various accounts of the details of the end times, with a particular focus on the time of the Great Tribulation, right? Again, we don't really see almost anything said about that beginning time, that time of peace, the first 3.5 years. So just to put it in perspective here in closing, the final 7 years from beginning to end, seeing how the seals kind of work out there. And again, this is my opinion, right? But I see the first seal as marking the reign of the Antichrist beginning, and as he's conquering through peace in the beginning, more than likely through this covenant that he makes, and he brings other nations under his control, right? And then 3.5 years later, in the middle of the 7 year period, we see the second seal when is broken, when peace is removed from the earth. The sword is given. We have this release of war on the earth and killing, right? And then seals 3 to 6 just seem to fall into the middle of the Great Tribulation, famine, death in Hades, the cry of the martyrs, the believers who are killed during this time, as well as the mourning of unbelievers during this time, as you see the signs in the sun, moon, and stars, right? And then we have the seventh seal as well, that's later mentioned in Revelation 8. And the seventh seal simply releases the 7 trumpets, which are also connected to the 7 bowls, and we'll see more how they play out later. So I think, again, Revelation 6 just gives us this overview of the end times, the final 7 years. So this is the conclusion to this teaching on Revelation 6, the end times. These are some of the resources I use in my preparation for this teaching. And as always, I want to encourage you to share this teaching with others. And as you're able, please partner with us so that we continue to make these teachings available to you and to others. Thank you so much, and see you again next time.